The heavy paper slapped against the Italian marble island with a sharp crack. "Sign it, Leo," Chloe said, her tone dripping with fake urgency. "Right now. We don't have time for your usual arrogance." I didn't flinch. I slowly set my porcelain mug down, letting the black coffee swirl inside it. I looked at the document resting between us. Property title transfer and debt assumption agreement. "You want me to sign over my $12 million modern estate?" I asked, my voice flat, calm, and void of emotion. "To cover a fraudulent offshore crypto liability?" Standing right behind my wife was Julian. He squeezed her shoulder, dabbing at the corner of his dry eye with a silk handkerchief. He looked like an actor auditioning for a low-budget soap opera. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Leo," Julian whimpered, his voice trembling on cue. "The market turned overnight. I was trying to build a future for my family. If I don't settle with the offshore lenders by midnight, they'll destroy my life. Chloe said you'd understand. You're a businessman." "I am a businessman," I agreed smoothly, leaning back against the counter and folding my arms. "Which means I evaluate risk, competence, and return on investment. You have zero competence, 100% risk, and your return is a federal fraud charge." "Watch your mouth," Chloe snapped, her chest heaving as she stepped closer. "Julian made a mistake made out of passion. You sit in this house with your millions, acting like you're above everyone else. You owe me this, Leo. I am your wife." "You are my wife," I said, dropping a cold smirk. "You are not my financial conservator. In this house." I tapped my knuckle against the cold marble. "I bought the land 6 months before I met you. I paid the architect. I cleared the mortgage. My name is the sole title holder on the deed." Julian stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a desperate attempt to look intimidating. "You're playing with fire, Vance. Chloe has rights. If you don't sign this contract, she'll drag you through a public divorce that will tear your reputation to shreds. You'll lose half of everything anyway." I almost laughed at his pathetic bluster. The guy owed $4 million to hardline private lenders, yet here he was trying to lecture me on leverage. "Julian," I murmured, taking a single step toward him. He instinctively flinched backward, bumping into the bar stools. "Your last tech startup went under in 90 days. Your second business was cited for tax evasion. You are an unemployed leech wearing a suit paid for by my credit cards." "Stop insulting him," Chloe screamed, slamming her manicured fist onto the counter. "I'm giving you one last chance, Leo. Sign the transfer paper, or I call my divorce attorney tonight. I will make sure you burn." "Are you done?" I asked, my tone dead flat. Chloe blinked, taken aback by my complete lack of panic. "What?" I reached inside my suit jacket, pulled out a crisp, white envelope, and laid it casually on top of her transfer papers. "What is this?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. "A settlement offer?" "Read it," I said. She snatched the paper out of the envelope, her eyes scanning the top line. Within 3 seconds, the color drained completely from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "That," I said, capping my silver fountain pen with a clean, audible click, "is a formal 30-day notice to vacate. An eviction notice." You can't evict me," Chloe stammered, her dramatic posture crumbling instantly. "I live here. This is my home." "It was your residence," I corrected cleanly. "Until an hour ago. You see, Chloe, while you were busy spending the afternoon at the spa planning this little kitchen ultimatum, my legal team was busy purchasing your personal debt portfolio from your credit agencies." Julian gasped, looking at Chloe in pure horror. "What did he say?" "I own your personal credit lines now, Chloe," I continued, stepping around the island and towering over both of them. "You breached our prenuptial agreement the moment you used marital funds to cover Julian's personal bail bond last month. You are currently in default of over $800,000 to my holding company." "Leo, please," Chloe gasped, reaching out to grab my arm. I took a smooth step back, avoiding her touch as if she were carrying a virus. "You wanted to trade papers tonight," I murmured softly, looking down at them both with absolute disgust. "You brought me a surrender document. I'm handing you an eviction. You have 30 days to clear your belongings out of my house. Starting now." The crystal chandeliers of the St. Regis Ballroom hummed above 300 of Manhattan's elite. I stood near the VIP lounge, casually swirling a glass of vintage champagne. Then the whispers started. There he is. Chloe's voice pierced through the ambient string quartet like a screeching tire. She marched down the grand marble staircase in a crimson silk dress, flanked by Julian in a tuxedo that looked rented. High-profile investors, board members, and journalists immediately turned their heads. Chloe wanted an audience. She thought public embarrassment was her ultimate weapon. "Leo Vance," she shouted, stepping directly into the center of the ballroom. "Are you really going to stand there drinking champagne while you kick your own wife onto the street?" The room went dead silent. Cameras began flashing instantly. Julian stepped up beside her, placing a comforting hand on her waist and assuming a posture of righteous indignation. "Show some dignity, Leo. You froze her credit cards. You served her with an eviction notice because she refused to let you control her financial independence." I didn't panic. I didn't rush to hide my face or whisper a desperate plea. I took a slow, calm sip of champagne and set my crystal flute on a passing waiter's tray. "Chloe," I said, my voice smooth, deep, and perfectly controlled. "You're making a scene." "I am making a statement," she shrieked, her eyes wild with dramatic flair. "Everyone in this room needs to know who you really are. A cold, financial abuser who isolates his wife and starves her out the moment she stands up for herself." Julian nodded aggressively to the murmuring crowd. "He thinks his wealth makes him untouchable. He tried to destroy my reputation just because I supported Chloe through his domestic neglect." I looked at them both, letting a slow, sarcastic smirk touch my lips. Domestic neglect? That's a creative phrase for someone who maxed out 3 corporate credit lines in 4 weeks. "Lies!" Chloe yelled, her hands shaking as she pointed at me. "You forced me to use those cards because you locked our joint accounts." "Did I?" I murmured. I turned away from her and walked directly toward the main stage, where the keynote presentation screen was glowing with our charity logo. Marcus Vance, my lead investor, stood near the podium with a furrowed brow. "Leo, what is she talking about?" Marcus asked under his breath as I reached the stage. "Watch," I replied simply. I stepped up to the microphone, tapping the wireless receiver twice. The crisp, sharp sound echoed through the entire ballroom, commanding immediate silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting across the room with absolute authority. "My wife and her associate have brought a personal matter onto this stage. Since they value total transparency, let's give them complete visibility." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small black flash drive, and slotted it into the podium's primary media console. "What are you doing?" Julian shouted from the floor, his smug expression cracking into sudden panic. "Stop him. He's defaming us." With a single tap on the control screen, the charity logo disappeared. In its place, giant 40-foot high-definition bank ledgers and wire transfer logs filled the main wall screen. The crowd gasped in unified shock. "What you are looking at," I declared coldly, pointing a silver laser pointer at the top line, "is a $3 million illicit offshore transfer routed through shell entities in the Cayman Islands. Executed 48 hours ago by Julian Ross." That's a private business transaction," Julian stammered, his face turning ghostly white as he took a step back. "It is wire fraud, Julian." I corrected him sharp and clear. "And the funding source?" I moved the laser pointer down to the highlighted red rows. "Corporate credit accounts belonging to my holding firm, illegally authorized by Chloe using forged executive signatures." Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Several high-ranking SEC members in the audience immediately pulled out their phones, taking direct photos of the projected documents. Chloe stood frozen in the center of the room, her mouth hanging open, completely paralyzed by the sudden glare of unfiltered truth. "You didn't come here to expose a neglectful husband, Chloe," I said into the microphone, my eyes locked on her trembling frame. "You came here hoping public pressure would force me to cover your co-conspirators' felony charges." Marcus Vance stepped onto the stage beside me, his face hardened with disgust. He grabbed the podium mic. "Security, revoke Chloe Vance and Julian Ross's credentials immediately. Escort them off the premises and hold them for the authorities." for large security guards closed in on them instantly. Julian tried to scramble backward, tripping over a table leg, while Chloe covered her face, sobbing in utter humiliation as the crowd sneered and pointed at her. I picked up my champagne glass from the podium, took a calm sip, and looked down at her. "Enjoy the walk outside, Chloe. The rain just started." My sleek black SUV pulled up to the security gates of my estate at midnight. The iron gates were propped wide open. A commercial van sat idling in the circular driveway. I stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting my cufflinks. My head of private security, Sarah, stepped out right behind me, her expression stone cold. There, right near the front double doors, stood Chloe, Julian, and a sweating locksmith holding a heavy drill near my personal wall vault panel. "Hurry up," Chloe was snapping at the worker. "It's my house. Drill the lock open." "Having trouble with key management?" I asked smoothly, my voice cutting through the damp night air. Chloe spun around, her jaw dropping. The locksmith froze, looking terrified as he took in the sight of Sarah's tactical frame and my tailored suit. "Leo," Chloe stammered, quickly masking her shock with an ugly glare. "You have no right to be here. You locked my personal jewelry in this vault. That vault holds my corporate backup drives and family heirlooms," I replied, walking forward with unhurried steps. "Items that do not belong to a squatter." Julian sneered, dropping his crowbar onto the porch with a loud metallic clatter. He puffed out his chest, stepping down the stairs to block my path. He tried to put on a show of physical dominance, towering over me with aggressive posturing. "Listen to me, you arrogant prick," Julian growled, shoving a finger inches from my chest. "You humiliated us tonight at the gala. You ruined Chloe's family reputation. You're going to open that vault right now, or I swear to God, I'll snap your neck." I looked down at his finger, then up into his wide, desperate eyes. I dropped a cold, pitying smirk. "You should stick to white-collar fraud, Julian," I whispered. "Your form is terrible." Before he could react, I executed a swift, precise self-defense maneuver. I grabbed his outstretched wrist, twisted it inward, and swept his lead leg with my boot. Snap crack. Julian let out a high-pitched squeal as his shoulder popped out of alignment, dropping him instantly to his knees on the hard stone pavement. He clutched his joint, writhing and groaning like a beaten dog. "Julian!" Chloe shrieked, rushing down the steps. "Leo, stop. You're a monster." I stepped over Julian's trembling frame without taking my eyes off her. "Sarah, make sure he doesn't dirty my driveway." "Understood, boss," Sarah said, placing a heavy tactical boot firmly onto Julian's back, pinning him flat to the ground. I turned to the shivering locksmith. "How much were they paying you to drill that panel?" $500, sir," the man stammered, dropping his drill. "I didn't know. She said she lost her key." I reached into my breast pocket, pulled out a stack of crisp $100 bills, and placed them into his trembling hand. "Here is 2,000. Replace every key lock on this estate with high-grade biometric scanners. Program them exclusively to my thumbprint. Do it right now." "Why, yes, sir. Right away," the locksmith stuttered, practically sprinting to get his equipment from his van. Chloe stood paralyzed on the steps, watching her grand-breaking crumble in less than 2 minutes. "Leo, please," she whispered, her voice finally breaking into desperate sobs. "You can't do this. Where am I supposed to go?" I signaled to the front doors. 2 uniformed moving staff members stepped out onto the porch, carrying 6 heavy, black industrial trash bags stuffed to the brim. They stacked them neatly outside the iron gates, right on the wet sidewalk curb. "Your designer gowns, shoes, and makeup are in those bags, Chloe," I informed her coldly, tapping my silver pen against my palm. "Everything purchased with my credit card stays inside." "Trash bags?" she screamed, her voice cracking in hysterical disbelief. "You put my Chanel dresses in trash bags on the curb? They fit the aesthetic of your current lifestyle," I replied flatly. Sarah shoved Julian toward the open gates, tossing him onto the pavement next to the pile of garbage bags. Chloe ran after him, weeping uncontrollably as the heavy iron gates began to automatically slide shut. I stood on the porch, watching them through the steel bars as the new biometric locks chimed with a high-pitched green light. "Sleep tight, Chloe. I called out into the dark. Your 30 days started 2 hours ago. The top floor conference room of Apex Syndicate sat 40 stories above Manhattan. Outside, dark gray storm clouds rolled across the skyline. Inside, the air was thick with corporate malice. At the far end of the mahogany table sat my father-in-law, Arthur Sterling, leaning forward with his hands resting heavily on his gold-headed cane. Beside him sat Chloe, her eyes red-rimmed, but her posture stiffened by pure desperation. 9 senior board members lined the sides, looking uncomfortable. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice, Leo," Arthur sneered, his voice raspy with entitlement. "Though I assure you, your presence here is merely a formality." I didn't sit down immediately. I casually walked to the corner bar, poured 2 fingers of neat scotch into a crystal tumbler, and took a slow, measured sip. "An emergency board meeting at 8 in the morning, Arthur?" I asked, my voice flat, calm, and utterly indifferent. "I assume you have a legitimate operational crisis. Or did Chloe drag you out of retirement to fight her domestic battles?" Chloe slammed her hand onto the glass table. "Watch your tone, Leo. You think you can throw me out on the street and play God with my life? My family owns 25% of this firm's equity. You work for us. You owned equity, Chloe," I corrected smoothly, pulling out the center leather armchair and sliding into it with effortless composure. "Until you leveraged your shares to secure Julian's bail bond last week. But please continue. I want to hear Arthur's pitch." Arthur leaned over the table, sliding a blue leather folder toward the board members. "Under Section 4B of the Corporate Charter," Arthur declared, raising his voice to command the room, "the board holds the power to immediately strip the chief executive officer of his title and voting rights in the event of a severe moral breach. Leo's recent public antics, publicly humiliating my daughter, freezing company lines, and engaging in erratic personal vendettas, have wiped 4% off our pre-market valuation." He looked around the room, grinning like a shark that smelled blood in the water. I motioned for an immediate vote of no confidence. "We remove Leo Vance as CEO today and appoint an interim board committee." Chloe let out a breathy, triumphant laugh, crossing her arms as she looked at me. "You thought you won, didn't you, Leo? You thought you were the smartest man in the room. But my father built this board. You're finished." I looked at Arthur, then at Chloe. I almost laughed at the sheer, tragic absurdity of their theatrical confidence. They were playing checkers while I owned the board, the pieces, and the table. "A moral breach clause," I murmured, swirling my scotch. "How poetic, Arthur. Coming from a man who spent the last 3 fiscal quarters running a ghost payroll operation out of our European subsidiary." Arthur's smug expression froze instantly. The color began draining from his liver-spotted face. What nonsense are you talking about?" I didn't answer him verbally. I reached inside my inner suit pocket, pulled out a sleek, frosted glass flash drive, and tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table with a soft clink. "On that drive," I said, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp, hyperlogical register that commanded total silence, "is a forensic audit executed by independent federal investigators. It details 47 wire transactions over 8 months. Total value, $12.6 million. I leaned forward, placing my forearms on the table and looking Arthur dead in the eye. "Transferred directly from Arthur Sterling's private offshore trust into accounts owned by Julian Ross." The board members gasped. 2 senior directors grabbed the flash drive and plugged it directly into the room's main interface screen. Instantly, detailed bank routes, IP logs, and offshore corporate signatures flashed across the displays in bright red print. "Dad," Chloe whispered, her cocky posture melting into pure terror as she stared at the screen. "Dad, what is that? Tell me he's lying," Arthur stammered, his lips quivering as he clutched his chest. It's a frame-up. The data is fabricated. The data is verified by the Department of Justice, Arthur," I said coldly, taking another sip of my scotch. "You didn't just support a fraud. You co-signed it. You used company assets to fund your daughter's ex-fiancé." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket with a swift, decisive motion. As CEO and majority shareholder holding 65% of voting stock, I declared, looking around at the terrified board. I execute an immediate freeze on all Sterling family assets tied to this firm. Furthermore, I motioned to strip Arthur Sterling of his board seat for gross fiduciary embezzlement. I second the motion, the lead board director shouted instantly, eager to distance himself from the disaster. All in favor? I asked. Every single hand at the table shot up into the air without a second of hesitation. Arthur let out a wet, raspy gasp, grabbing his arm as a massive panic attack seized his chest. He slumped heavily against the table, wheezing while the board members ignored him and backed away in disgust. Chloe dropped to her knees beside her father, hyperventilating as she looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Leo, please, call an ambulance. He's having a heart attack. We're family." I picked up my scotch glass, emptied the last drop, and set it down with a clean, audible click. "You were family, Chloe," I whispered, stepping right past her kneeling frame without looking back. "Now you're just a corporate liability being liquidated." I stood on the oceanfront balcony of my private beach estate, listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore. I took a slow, satisfying sip of aged bourbon, enjoying the absolute tranquility of the warm afternoon breeze. My private phone buzzed on the glass table beside me. The caller ID displayed a number I knew all too well, Chloe. I let it ring 3 full times, enjoying the sheer mental image of her mounting panic, before picking it up and placing it on speaker. "Leo, you psychotic son of a bitch." Chloe's voice shrieked through the speaker, so loud it almost distorted the receiver. She sounded completely unhinged, her breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. "What did you do to my cards? Why is every single one of my bank accounts declined?" I took another calm sip of bourbon, leaning back into my leather lounge chair. "Good afternoon to you too, Chloe. I see you finally tried to pay for something yourself." "Don't play games with me," she screamed, the sound of ambient street noise and honking horns echoing in her background. "I'm sitting at a legal retainer office in Midtown. I tried to pay my defense attorney's deposit with our joint emergency account, and the cashier told me the card was terminated." "Terminated, Leo. That is my money. I am legally your wife." I dropped a cold, dry chuckle. "Correction. You were an authorized user on an account funded entirely by my primary holding firm." Keyword being were. "You can't just cut me off," she sobbed, her tone abruptly shifting from vicious rage to pathetic, manipulative desperation. "I have no cash. I have no place to stay. My father is in the hospital recovering from a panic attack, and Julian can't get his bail bond released. You are starving me out. It's illegal. Let me educate you on the law, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth, sharp, and hyperlogical. 2 weeks before you brought Julian into our lives, the very moment I noticed irregular accounting transfers from our domestic fund, I formally executed a legal severance of all joint financial vehicles. My legal team filed the paper with the state treasury. Two weeks ago," she stammered, her frantic screaming instantly dying down into horror. You knew back then? "I am an engineer and a CO, Chloe," I replied, dropping a sharp, sarcastic smirk. "I analyze patterns. The moment your spending metrics shifted toward luxury hotel reservations in Soho and high-end criminal defense consults, I audited you. You thought you were playing a clever little double life. I was simply setting up the legal kill switch." "Leo, please." She wept openly now, her voice breaking into hysterical, terrified sobs. "You can't do this to me. I have $42 in my purse. $42. How am I supposed to buy food? How am I supposed to pay for a lawyer?" "You could try getting a job," I suggested flatly. "Though with your resume, I doubt anyone would trust you near a cash register." "Please, Leo. I was stupid. I was manipulated by Julian. He lied to me. He told me he loved me and that we could build something together," she pleaded, her tears flowing fast and heavy over the line. "I made a mistake. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll apologize on live television. Just unfreeze my personal checking account. Please." Your personal account," I murmured, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "I almost forgot to mention that." What about it?" she gasped, catching her breath with a faint glimmer of desperate hope. The Federal Tax Fraud Division froze it 3 hours ago, I said, letting every single word land like a heavy lead weight. Along with the forensic evidence of corporate embezzlement I dropped at the board meeting, I submitted a full tax audit of your personal income over the last 3 years. You haven't paid capital gains taxes since 2021. Silence deadened the line. Absolute, suffocating silence. You reported me to the IRS? She whispered, her voice barely a breath. I am a law-abiding citizen, Chloe, I replied, my tone dripping with icy contempt. I report financial crimes whenever I see them, especially when they occur in my own household. Leo, don't leave me like this. Please, I'm begging you on my knees. Leo, your 30 days are ticking away, Chloe. I cut her off cleanly. Don't waste your remaining phone battery on me. I ended the call with a light tap of my thumb, set the phone back on the glass table, and picked up my bourbon, returning my gaze to the peaceful ocean horizon. The wet asphalt of Soho reflected the gray afternoon sky. I adjusted my designer coat, walking down the sidewalk alongside Sarah. We were inspecting 3 commercial properties I was acquiring on the block. The deed for the corner unit closes tomorrow, boss, Sarah noted, holding open a tablet. Before I could reply, a side door to a cramped, dilapidated apartment building flew open. Out stumbled Chloe. She looked unrecognizable. Her signature blonde hair was tangled and unwashed. Her once pristine designer silk blouse was crumpled and stained with cheap coffee. Leo? She shrieked, her voice cracking as her eyes locked onto me. She practically threw herself down the concrete steps, sprinting across the pavement. Leo, wait. Please. I stopped, turning smoothly to face her. My hands remained tucked inside my coat pockets, my expression entirely impassive. Chloe collapsed to her knees directly on the filthy, wet sidewalk, grabbing at the hem of my trousers. Leo, look at me. I'm living in a rat-infested studio. I have nothing left. Take me back, please. I'll drop everything. I'll be the perfect wife. Get your hands off my pants, Chloe, I commanded coldly, stepping back just enough to break her grip. You're ruining the tailored wool. You don't understand, she wept hysterically, clutching her hands to her chest. Julian dragged me into this. He manipulated me. He forced me to sign those transfers. It was all his idea. Is that right? A sharp voice barked from the apartment doorway. Julian stepped out onto the street, wearing a grease-stained hoodie. His face was pale, his posture hunched and defensive. You lying bitch, Julian roared, marching toward her with his fists clenched. You were the one who begged me to help you take his money. You said he was a cold, unfeeling robot who deserved to be bled dry. I watched them, dropping a slow, razor-thin smirk. The spectacle was almost entertaining. Look at you two, I said softly, my voice cutting through their screaming match like a scalpel. A match made in absolute ruin. Julian turned to me, his arrogance completely shattered, replaced by desperate self-preservation. Leo, listen to me. I'll testify against her. I'll sign an affidavit right now stating Chloe was the mastermind behind the entire corporate theft. Just drop the civil lawsuit against me. Julian? Chloe gasped, looking up at him in sheer, horrified betrayal. You told me you loved me. You promised we were going to start over. Love you? Julian scoffed, spitting onto the pavement. You're broke. Your father is a disgraced felon, and you're useless without Leo's bank account. Chloe let out a gut-wrenching sob, burying her face in her stained sleeves. You monster. I ruined my entire life for you. I almost feel pity for you, Chloe, I said, looking down at her crumpled form on the pavement. You traded an empire for a pathetic leech who threw you to the wolves the second the temperature rose. Leo, please, Julian begged, taking a hasty step toward me with his hands raised. We can make a deal. Just give me a pass. I pulled out my silver pocket watch, clicking it open with a light tap of my thumb. You're out of time, Julian, I said smoothly. I don't make deals with small-time thieves. Right on cue, 2 sleek black law enforcement sedans pulled up to the curb, sirens blaring for a brief, sharp pulse. 4 uniformed police officers stepped out, moving with practiced speed. Julian Ross, the lead officer called out, pulling a set of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for interstate wire fraud and conspiracy to commit corporate embezzlement." Julian's face drained of every drop of color. "Wait, no. She's the one you want. Chloe Sterling. Arrest her." "Save it for your public defender," Sarah interjected coldly, stepping between Julian and me as the officers grabbed his arms and slammed him face first onto the hood of the police cruiser. Julian screamed obscenities as the steel cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, shoving him into the back seat of the vehicle. Rain began to drizzle from the overcast sky, soaking through Chloe's ruined designer clothes. She sat frozen on the wet pavement, watching the police car speed away, taking her last remaining partner in crime with it. She looked up at me through the falling rain, completely broken, utterly abandoned, and hopelessly bankrupt. What am I supposed to do now, Leo?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. I adjusted my collar, turning on my heel to walk toward my waiting vehicle. "I suggest you clear your schedule, Chloe," I called back over my shoulder, my tone completely devoid of warmth. "The IRS expects your formal statement at 9 sharp tomorrow morning." The flashing red and blue lights of the federal sedans illuminated the rain-slicked Soho pavement. Julian's frantic shrieks echoed down the street as 2 agents forced his head into the back of the cruiser. "She made me do it," Julian screamed, his face pressed flat against the glass window. "Chloe Sterling is the mastermind. You're arresting the wrong person." Chloe didn't even look up from the asphalt. She sat huddled in the rain, staring at nothing, completely hollowed out. I didn't waste another second watching the spectacle. I turned on my heel, stepped into the back of my town car, and headed straight to my legal team's headquarters in Midtown. 2 hours later, we sat in a glass-walled conference room on the 55th floor. Across the long marble table sat Chloe. She looked ghastly. A cheap, oversized coat was draped over her damp clothes, provided by the public defender sitting nervously beside her. Her eyes were bloodshot, her skin pale, her hands shaking so violently she could barely keep them flat on the table. Her court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named Miller, pushed a thick stack of legal documents toward her. "Sign it, Chloe," Miller muttered, leaning over to whisper into her ear with harsh urgency. "This is a gift. Mr. Vance's legal team has agreed not to name you as a co-conspirator in the federal grand larceny indictment on the strict condition that you execute this emergency dissolution agreement immediately." Chloe blinked slowly, her breath hitching as her eyes scanned the top page. "No alimony? 0% of the marital estate? Forfeiture of all Sterling family trust claims." "You don't have leverage, Chloe," Miller warned, tapping his finger on the paper. "If you don't sign this in the next 5 minutes, the prosecutors waiting downstairs will serve you with a federal warrant for wire fraud. You will be in a cell next to Julian by nightfall." I helped build his life," she whispered, her voice cracking as tears filled her eyes again. "I spent 4 years with him. I deserve something." I almost laughed at the sheer, delusional entitlement still lingering in her broken mind. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my silver fountain pen, and unclipped the cap with a crisp, authoritative click. "You deserve precisely what you brought into this marriage, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through her sniveling like a steel blade. "Which, according to your audited financial statements, is minus $200,000 in personal debt." "Leo, please," she begged, looking up at me with raw, pathetic desperation. "You're taking everything. My home, my name, my father's legacy. I'll have nothing left. Where am I supposed to go?" "You had everything," I replied, leaning forward and staring into her eyes with unyielding coldness. "You had a CEO for a husband, an oceanfront estate, unlimited credit lines, and absolute security. But you traded an empire for a cheap thrill with a second-rate scammer. Actions have consequences, Chloe. Welcome to reality." Miller slid a heavy black pen into her trembling fingers. "Sign the paper, Chloe. Right now, or I walk out of this room and let the feds take you." Tears streamed down her pale cheeks, dripping directly onto the pristine white paper. Her hand shook violently as she pressed the tip of the pen down. With slow, painful strokes, she signed her name on every required line, relinquishing every legal claim, every cent, and every scrap of luxury she had ever enjoyed. She pushed the document back across the table, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with silent, uncontrollable sobs. I pulled the settlement toward me. In 3 swift, practiced motions, I executed my signature at the bottom of each document. The marriage was dead. The liability was liquidated. I capped my fountain pen with a sharp click and slipped it back into my breast pocket. Reaching into my suit jacket once more, I pulled out a small piece of printed paper I had purchased on the drive over. I tossed it across the marble table. It slid smoothly, stopping right against her trembling wrists. Chloe wiped her eyes, looking down at it in confusion. What is this? A one-way Greyhound bus ticket to your mother's home in Ohio, I said flatly, standing up and buttoning my jacket. The bus leaves from Port Authority in 45 minutes. I suggest you don't miss it. You can't afford a hotel room in Manhattan. I turned toward the glass doors without waiting for a reply. Leo, she cried out behind me, her voice ringing with final, unbearable ruin. I didn't stop. I walked out into the private elevator, stepped inside, and watched the doors slide smoothly shut between us forever. 6 months later, the top floor of the newly finished Vance Tower offered an unobstructed view of Manhattan. The sun was setting over the Hudson, casting a golden light across the city. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass panel, swirling a single ice cube in a crystal glass of 18-year-old single malt. Quarterly projections just cleared the legal team, Leo, Marcus said, stepping up beside me and handing over a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. Our acquisition of Sterling Capital's residual assets pushed our market valuation past $12 billion. We didn't just survive the shock. We quadrupled our ceiling. Predictable, I replied smoothly, taking a measured sip. When you remove dead weight from a machine, performance improves exponentially. Sarah walked into the private lounge area, holding a remote and pointing it toward the massive wall-mounted monitor. You might want to see the evening broadcast, boss, Sarah said, dropping a sharp, satisfied smile. The Southern District Judge just finished sentencing. I turned slightly, watching the news ticker scroll across the bottom of the screen. Flash. Julian Ross sentenced to 20 years for federal wire fraud and grand larceny. The screen cut to footage of Julian being led out of the courthouse in orange scrubs and heavy wrist chains. He was sobbing uncontrollably, thrashing against the federal marshals as reporters shouted questions. His former swagger was completely obliterated. He looked small, broken, and utterly terrified. 20 years without parole, Marcus chuckled dryly. He'll be 50 by the time he sees a sunrise without bars. And what about Arthur's former golden child? I asked, my tone purely academic. Sarah pressed another button on the remote, switching the feed to a localized news report on court-ordered restitution enforcement. The camera caught a quick, distant shot of a diner on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Bustling between tables with a heavy tray of dirty dishes was Chloe. Her polished manicures were gone, replaced by worn sneakers and a faded apron. Her face looked tired, drained of every drop of former arrogance. She's working double shifts at a diner to pay off her 30% share of the civil restitution order, Sarah noted. The IRS took her remaining trust distributions. She'll be paying off that debt for the next 15 years. I stared at the image on the screen for 3 seconds. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, and certainly no regret. I almost chuckled at how completely they had engineered their own destruction. They thought they were staging a coup. They were merely executing their own liquidation. Turn it off, Sarah, I commanded calmly. It's taking up prime screen space. She clicked the display off instantly, returning the room to its quiet, powerful atmosphere. Marcus raised his crystal glass toward me. To absolute focus, Leo. Most men would have let a personal betrayal slow them down. You turned it into a hostile takeover. Emotional reactions cost money, Marcus, I said, clinking my glass against his with a crisp, clear chime. Logic creates leverage. Never confuse the two. I drained the rest of my scotch, setting the empty glass down on the obsidian bar with a heavy, definitive thud. Walking over to my massive mahogany desk, I pulled out my silver fountain pen and unclipped the cap. Laid out on the desk was the final signature page for a multi-billion-dollar international logistics merger. the deal that would seal my firm's dominance over the entire eastern seaboard. I sat down in the leather chair, leaning forward with absolute authority. "Get the press release ready for 8:30 tomorrow morning," I said, sliding the document into place. "The market opens in 12 hours, and I intend to own it." Without looking back at the skyline, the TV screen, or the ghosts of a broken past, I pressed the nib of my pen to the paper and signed my name.